Live from the Greene Space, Melissa Errico and Ryan Silverman, along with musical director and pianist Rob Berman. That was Happiness. The opening song from the Tony
Award-winning. It's hard to do all that without all the smooching.
Yeah.
We may not be dressed, but we're doing,
We're doing a lot of other things.
Well, you come and decide.
Yeah.
You actually start on top of him at the very beginning.
I sure do.
Yes.
And you can decide.
It's really like this beautiful big skirt, and so anyway.
How hard is that? How difficult is that for you?
It depends on the night.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Ryan.
Wait, depends on the night.
I just meant from a breathing standpoint.
I don't know. What did he say? Okay.
To pull that off.
It's actually not bad. I'm like singing on your back is actually a lot easier than you would think.
Oh God, I can't believe this conversation.
You don't mind, do you?
Dear.
It's great.
And it's good. I mean, it's good because I'm not thinking about
We're gonna make it sound
breathing
all
so much.
serious.
Well, no, yeah, there's so much else going on that you don't. I'm not concentrating on
Yeah.
my diaphragm. So.
Oh my
Mr.
God.
Sondheim, let me ask you.
I don't know how this
I'm
got
concentrating
started.
on it.
I believe Rodgers and Hammerstein had this discussion about trying to get love songs into the first act.
They did?
Yeah, I don't know if you're
They did it a lot of times.
working it in there. Something they, I think, called pretend love songs. People will say we're in love. I mean, obviously love happens and it's easier in the second act. I was just curious if any of this, I mean, you start right away with this extreme.
Yeah, but I've always liked that kind of theater. One of the reasons I love Strindberg as a playwright is he doesn't give you a chance to get into it. Curtain goes up and people are at each other's throats. You don't even know who they are, and already they are so upset. And that's my idea. Yeah, I love that theater, as opposed to the maid comes on and says, "Yes, Mr. and Mrs. Smith are out for dinner tonight, and yes, they'll be home later. Oh, here they are now." You don't get a chance to get introduced. And you don't get it, and so this is what happens right here, right in the middle of it. I really wanted, I guess I can use the word, I really wanted to open the show with an orgasmic scream and close it with an orgasmic scream when the other lady, and so, and it didn't quite work out because I needed the coda at the end with, I won't tell the audience if they don't know what happens after that. But I wanted again I love to take an audience by the throat right when the curtain goes up, which is like an Into the Woods, Once Upon a Time, and there's this wild crash. You hear Once Upon a Time, you think, now I'm going to get the story, but you get to the word time, and the orchestra comes in and wakes people up. It takes a while when people have come from real life and having drinks and maybe eating or something like that to get them into a show. And if you give them too much time, there's a loginess. So if you can grab them right away, that's what. So I thought it'd be really good to start the piece that way.
Well, we're grabbed, and you guys are grabbed right from the beginning as well. You had talked about getting back to your Italian roots with this role, Melissa. Tell us about that.
Oh, what should I say about that? I'm Italian. Hey. I just love the play. It's not just about being Italian. It's the whole thing. But
does that affect you at all?
Well, in my house, all the emotions are big.
Well, then it does.
I mean, all the emotions are big. There's a lot of, I just was brought up to want a lot, and to want a lot out of every day, and so it's it does feel nice to be in an environment where I can just be myself in some ways, or just feel all those anyway, to work with you. I mean,
well, but what's interesting about that
everything.
is that you play the coolest of the three principal characters. I mean,
I do.
Or the cooler of the two women, I should say.
I guess
which
so.
is in a way.
Well,
ironic.
she knows that it can't be. I think Clara has an awareness that there is an emptiness in Clara. She's not an unhappy person. I mean, my dress is beautiful. My life is probably absolutely beautiful in some ways, but the husband isn't. It's just Giorgio she's a mother, and there's a fantasy and a a hole in her in her life in some ways that she can fulfill. But I think she knows that it's not possible.
Well, in Italy
and
in
so
the
in that way
19th
there's-
century, it was, everything was very proper. I mean,
Yeah, and it's
it
pretty
has
daring of her as it is,
as
correct?
yes,
Yeah.
It's Victorian, for lack of a better word.
So she's a little outrageous in that way, yeah. But she doesn't throw everything aside, and she does have a child and all the other responsibilities. So she can't live completely by her instincts, her primitive side, her passion.
Could you both talk briefly to pretend he's not here about the challenges of Sondheim's music? The word is key signatures and that sort of thing are often difficult and a challenge. Is it a challenge for you?
Yeah, it is. But it's, what I loved about this rehearsal process was there was repetition, and it's just through repetition that it just sort of sinks into your body, and then you get it. You look at the page and you go, oh my Lord, I don't know if I'm going to get that. And then you just do it, and then it sort of just ends up making sense. You know what I mean?
I mean, we've been known to have these love scenes where I'm tapping on his back at the same time.
Yeah,
just to make
there are
sure.
challenges,
Yeah.
interesting challenges with this show because we don't actually see Rob, so we don't have someone, or we don't have a monitor, so we really have to know it here and in here.
Also, there are not a lot of what they call vamps. There are not a lot of heavy rhythmic accompaniments, so you can count 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. It's very, again, rhapsodic. So
Yeah,
it makes it
yeah.
very difficult for them.
If I may, there's one thing about your music which is so sorrowful. If you actually get the entrances where they're written, your heart breaks for a second. You go, oh my God! And of course, you sat down and chose those placements. So you really have to count so carefully, and they hit you so hard when you learn them right.
And Rob, is it the same for you as well, leading the band up there?
Yeah, it is. It's interesting because let me just also mention that it's a 9-piece new orchestration by Jonathan Tunick. The original production was, I think, 15 pieces. But we're up in a loft, visible to most of the audience. You can see us up there. But as Ryan mentioned, I'm not in a pit in front of them, able to cue them, conduct them, the actors. So from day one of this rehearsal process, we knew that was going to be the case, and I tried to train the actors and teach them the score so they absolutely knew what was happening all the time, what the other people were singing, what the accompaniment was doing, so they really, really understand what's going on. And I think it just has led to the cast really just knowing the music in a deeper way.
You were tough. You were good.
Thank you, Melissa.
What I'd like to do now is bring out the director of this current production. He's won Tony Awards for his productions of Sondheim's Sweeney Todd and Company, directed Roadshow at the Public, also directed plays by Brecht and Chekhov, as well as operas such as Lucia di Lammermoor, Peter Grimes, and more. Please welcome John Doyle.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here.
Pleasure.
So I heard a story that you actually brought this production to Classic Stage Company. Is that right?
Yes, I did. I'd never been to Classic Stage until Mr. Sondheim took me on a date one night. We had a date night, and he said, would you like to go to the theatre? And I said I would, and we went to Classic Stage to see The Three Sisters. And I really liked the space, and I got my people to contact Classic Stage and said, this is the kind of space I like working in. What's the chance? Thinking I would be asked to do a play, to be honest. But they said, would you come and do a musical? And I felt it was important to find a musical that had something classical about its story, really. And that's how Passion came about.
Do I have it right that they haven't done musicals
They've
before?
never done a musical. It's their first time in 40 years?
45
years?
45th season, I
Yeah.
think they're in right now.
They've never done a musical. They didn't know where to put the orchestra. I mean, we had to find a space to put the orchestra into. And so we've kind of not only created what's happening on the space itself, but in terms of the actual physical structure of the theatre, we've had to make changes.
So they were pushing for a musical as well. They'd never done one, and they thought this would be a good idea.
Never done one, thought this would be a good idea. I think probably thought I might do one of those John Doyle people carrying tuba around things. And I said, look, I don't really want to do that necessarily all the time. So can
Melissa, do you play the tuba?
She plays the flute. No, yes, the flute, isn't
That's
it?
right.
There you go. She hasn't played it for me yet, but I'm sure it's going to happen before this runs out.
So was there some discussion about them playing the instruments, or that was out from the beginning?
That was out from the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a very intimate space. Talk about working in this particular space. It's the audience is in three-quarter. They're almost all the way around.
Well, intimate's such a wonderful thing. I mean, I think it's great for theatre to be in small spaces. I've kind of been raised on it. I ran a theatre in the UK called the Everyman in Liverpool, which was a three-sided space, and has always been I like the round as well, although that's a little trickier for a musical. But I like the three-sided space very much. This makes me think of the Donmar in London. It's got a similar quality to the Donmar. To be so close to the action is wonderful. To feel that the room is filled with the musical sound is great. I mean, there was talk at one point very early on in this process of, should the orchestra be in another room, with the sound piped in? And I said, no, this has got to feel like a total experience where the live music is in the room as well. So it's absolutely great. And once you get used to it, I think for the performers, it's very freeing. It's lovely to sense that we're all breathing the same air at the same time. It's very good.
In addition to having some of the actors be the musicians as a hallmark of one of your work, you're also known a little bit for for minimalism regarding sets and props and that sort of thing. There's a big table, which they mime in this production, and beds, or they're on the floor, as we said.
Sure.
How did that really get started?
Well, there's no room, to be honest. I mean, the tables and bed, but if we'd put the table, the bed, and the billiard table on there, there'd be no room for the performers at all. I mean, how did that start? That started a long time ago for me in working in spaces and places that had no resources. And so I got used to the notion of having little. And I think it's become its own curse in a way. I'm just not very good at having anything anymore. So I find, I just keep stripping things away all the time. And people say that's an aesthetic or a concept or whatever. It's none of those things, really. It's just I do everything I can not to get in the way of the story. And I love to ask the audience to use its imagination. And I think that's a powerful thing in theatre making that is in danger of getting lost if we're not careful.
We have more performances to hear, but just briefly, if you would just give us a little bit of the background in your work in opera, since you're part of Today, America's premier classical radio station that we're on. Tell us about your work in opera.
I didn't really... I was never asked to do an opera until I did Sweeney Todd here in New York. I'd always wanted to do some. I got a call from Peter Gelb at the Metropolitan Opera who brought me into his room and said, would you be interested in coming here? And I said, well, I've never been able to afford to come here. I'd absolutely no idea that he was offering me a job. None whatsoever. He said, well, we would really like you to come here, and we would like you to do Peter Grimes. I said, are you kidding me? I mean, Peter Grimes, one of the great British pieces of opera theatre work, really. It's theatre, that piece. And he said, well, I saw Sweeney Todd and I thought you could, and I really did think he'd lost his mind then by the time, from Sweeney to that. But anyway, I love doing opera because I love being in the room with the music. The process of negotiating the establishments is a little more complex. But thank goodness the days of Park and Bark are gradually going away. And, I've just had the pleasure of being in Sydney at the Opera House doing Lucia de Lammermoor with a soprano who was as great an actor as any actor I've ever worked with. And that, when you get those opportunities, is a great thing. The artifice of it drives me slightly crazy. But it's... when I'm asked to do them, every time I do one, I think I'm never going to do another one. I'm done. I don't want them anymore. And then you get asked and you think, oh, God, that's such beautiful music. It's hard to say no.
We want to hear the next performance. Why don't you, if you would, John, tell us a little bit about Trio, The Fifth Letter. What are we going to hear in this trio?
You're going to hear one of the letters that is written into the show dramatically, which is a letter that Giorgio has sent to Fosca from Milan, where he's with Clara. And so you're hearing two themes, really. You're hearing the duet that the two the people that you think are the lovers of the story at that point are singing, and you're hearing the letter that she has received, but in Steve's wonderful way at the same